Let's come back to Nigeria and see what the federal government has been able to deal with the organized labor, having set it for 70,000 naira as minimum wage for Nigerian workers. The Minister of Information and National Orientation, Mohammed Idris, announced that both government and the labor centers have now agreed for 70,000 naira as salary for the least paid worker here in Nigeria. Before Thursday's meeting, the federal government had offered 62,000 naira as minimum wage, while Labour insisted on 250,000 naira as salary for the least paid Nigerian worker. The minister also explained that subsequent review of the minimum wage will be every 3 years and not the current 5 years. Well, let's bring in Arise Director of News and Politics Editor, Sumner Sambo, for more on this. Sumner, good to see you. And this is a story we've been following for months now. Let us in on what this would mean, because Labour is yet to speak. Ideally, after such meetings...
They've actually spoken
that, great. Give us the update on that.
Well, so the update is that the organized Labour, made up of the Nigeria Labour Congress and the Trade Union Congress, have both accepted this 70,000 naira new minimum wage. According to the NLC President, Joe Ajero, he says that President Tinubu's government should be commended for eventually agreeing to up it up from the 62,000 naira that had been agreed upon, and that they do accept it because there are several conditions that have been attached to it, not just the 70,000 naira new minimum wage. And some of the conditions are that the federal government says it will offset some of the 4-month salaries of university workers like SANU and NASU that you had seen we're planning to go on strike and all of that, and that there are some incentives that will be given, including the labor unions have been given some buses, I think about 37 buses or so. There are about CNG powered buses and all of that will be given to them. And then, of course, there are some other conditions that will be met by the federal government to actually support this 70,000 naira new minimum wage. So on the part of Labour, they all came out from the meeting smiling and commending President Tinubu for his fatherly role during the negotiation. But for the average Nigerian worker, I mean, people will start questioning their union leaders, because I mean, don't forget, the negotiation started from 615,000. It came down to 250,000. And now we are at 70,000. So you can make the mathematics yourself.
Well, still, let's latch on to that fatherly role of the president. Perhaps let us in on the conversation. We understand that he's saying that, look, we don't have to wait for another 5 years for us to always have this review. So he's moved it a little bit backwards to about 3 years.
Yes.
How good is that?
Well, that would have to make its way into the law, because the minimum wage is actually a law. So it means that he will now have to pass a new bill to the National Assembly, and then it will have to be reduced from 5 years to 3. And during that period, I mean, it's one of the incentives that the labor unions are saying. It could help to increase the minimum wage on time. And making it timely means that, you know, the minimum wage will not be static to the extent that it doesn't reflect the current realities in terms of inflation and all of that. But the organized private sector is actually saying that that may affect their own negotiations with their own workers and all of that. And when you would have to start thinking of increasing a new minimum wage for your workers just after 24 months and all of that, going to 36 months, then of course it means that it may be a little bit tardy for the organized private sector. That's what the NECA man and all of that are saying. But it's left to be seen how there can be a proper coordination of this, and then the federal government also have to support the organized private sector so that we'll see how this works in a seamless manner. And not only that, don't forget, the subnationals, the states themselves, are actually quarreling. In fact, they had said that they may not be able to pay the 62,000 naira minimum wage earlier agreed by the federal government, including the organized private sector. But now that it's been taken to 70,000, the federal government has to see how there's a win-win for all of them, because if not, it may end up being signed as a law and Labour accepting it, but so many states won't be able to meet up, and then the organized private sector won't be able to meet up, and it will end up being only the federal government being able to meet up. So it's still a dicey situation.
That's always been the argument, leaving the subnational, that's the states out of this whole equation. But again, we've seen what Edo, some other few states like Lagos have also proposed, which is an okay thing for the labor unions. But let us bring this again to the confines of the National Assembly. Once this is passed into law, what would this mean for the average employer of labor, Sumner? Does this mean that everyone who has someone in his employment cannot pay less than that 70,000 naira?
Well, theoretically, that's what it means. We've seen that crisis actually coming up when we had 18,000 naira as minimum wage and then eventually migrating to 30,000. Not many states were paying, not many private sector organizations were paying, and even with the nature of minimum wage itself, 30,000 naira as at the last time that we had it was not even the threshold. Like this 70,000 now, this is just the beginning. So in the real sense, an average worker is supposed to earn like 80,000, 90,000 or 100,000. So when you add this together and then the low level of productivity in the country with the poor economic indices that we are seeing, then there's a huge challenge. So the federal government has to bolster the economy, work with the states to actually improve the state of the economy. But one of the key things that I'm seeing that will happen here is that there will be retrenchment in some parts of the public sector because not many states will be able to pay this. I can tell you clearly that some of the state governors will be battling. So they'll have to give the Nigerian Labour Congress and TUC options. It's either you want us to pay the 70,000 and above and reduce workers, or you have a situation whereby you are forcing us and then we're unable to pay. So it becomes a dicey situation. For the organized private sector, yeah, of course, you know, they are not under government compulsion to that extent. So it will still have to be a way of managing it. But well, in all, President Tinubu must be commended, because what his aides and the federal government negotiating team had said is that they were not going to go above 62,000, and there were pressures on him not to do more than 62,000 because of the huge burden. But with this 70,000, at least he's been able to move up and he's been able to win the confidence of the labor unions. What has this done? It means we are not going to have a nationwide strike any longer. And deciding to pay NASU and SANU, the university unions, I think he deserves some credit in all of this. But the most important thing is that let's make the national cake much more bigger so that it can accommodate this. And the federal lawmakers should work swiftly to ensure that when the new minimum wage bill is transmitted, it is acted upon swiftly. And then in the next couple of months, we already have it, you know, being new salaries being paid through it.
Well, Sumner, let's see if we can close on this. A case of be careful what you wished for, and that's what Nigerians are experiencing at the moment now for all the states. We'll go back to the states. You've covered, the politics for years now. Are there states in the country that cannot pay the minimum wage?
Yeah, because we have several workers. In fact, many of them do not actually have the inventory of their staff fully. There are lots of ghost workers and all of that. So until they clean up the database of their workers, it will be pretty difficult. And one instance in this situation that we've had is that many governors are actually lazy to improve their internally generated revenue. And if they don't do that to support the funds that are coming from the federal government, there will be a challenge. And now with the new Supreme Court decision to actually make local governments to be able to get funds directly without going to the joint allocation account that they used to have, many of the states will be pressured not to be able to want to honor this as a way of hitting back at President Bola Tinubu for actually wanting the local governments to be independent. But so it has to be a win-win situation. If the state governments cannot be able to pay this, then of course the next thing will be for them to be able to reduce their workforce. Because many of those states actually, their viability is in question. But what I can say in this instance is that it's a very huge win, and the president has to work with the Nigerian Governors Forum to see how states can be supported. But it has to be states that show, you know, the capacity to be able to trim down their workforce in such a way that there's productivity at the center of it. Because if there's no productivity and the governors are just paying without, you know, doing something like what the federal government is doing, IPPIS, where you have to know the number of people who work for you and be sure that they are working, then of course they will be in trouble. But generally, I think it's commendable that there's a nationwide strike that has been averted. So the federal lawmakers should work very swiftly to ensure that this new minimum wage bill is passed very quickly.
Well, Sambo, many thanks for speaking with us.